The alien forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Jace moved slowly through the thick green path, his boots pressing into the damp ground. The air smelled of rain and strange flowers that only grew on this world. Above him, the canopy was so dense that the sky was just a pale, fading light between the branches. His dog, Ranger, walked ahead, his paws silent, his ears twitching at every small sound. Jace had been traveling for hours, heading back to his small camp before nightfall. He knew that on this planet, night was dangerous. There were animals here that did not fear humans, and some that hunted in complete silence. That was why he trusted Ranger's instincts more than anything else. Suddenly, Ranger stopped. His body became stiff, his ears pointing forward. A low, deep growl rumbled in his throat. Jace froze too. He knew Ranger did not growl unless something unusual was near. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then Jace heard it faint, weak, almost like a whisper. It was not the cry of an animal. It was a voice. A voice that sounded broken, tired, and scared. He listened carefully. The sound came again, softer this time, as if whoever made it was struggling to speak. Jace's heartbeat quickened. He looked around, scanning the shadows between the trees. "Easy, boy," he whispered to Ranger. Though his own voice was tight with unease, he stepped off the path, pushing through tall ferns and vines that glowed faintly in the dim light. The forest floor was uneven, covered with roots and rocks. The sound grew a little clearer, like a fragile thread pulling him forward. Ranger moved slowly, sniffing the air, his tail low and tense. Jace's eyes adjusted to the gloom, and he began to see small details. A broken branch here, disturbed. Leaves there. Someone or something had passed through this area recently. Then he saw her. She was lying against a large rock, half hidden by plants. At first, Jace thought she was just another casualty of the wilds, some traveler who had fallen. But as he stepped closer, his breath caught. Her skin was unlike anything he had ever seen, smooth and shimmering, with a faint purple glow under the surface. Her clothing, if it could be called that, looked like black armor made of something organic, as if it had grown around her body. There were glowing patterns on her arms and chest, dim now, flickering like dying embers. Her face was young, almost human in shape. But her eyes, when they fluttered open for a brief moment, were large and bright, reflecting light like liquid metal. She looked at him, startled and afraid. She tried to speak, but her words were not in his language. The sound was soft and musical, but broken by pain. She coughed, a harsh, wet sound, and turned her head as if even speaking hurt her. Jace knelt beside her, careful not to startle her more. Ranger came up slowly, sniffing her hand. She flinched at first, but then her tense muscles relaxed slightly when the dog did nothing but stand close. Jace's eyes moved to her injuries. There were deep cuts on her side and strange burns along her left arm. They didn't look like wounds from an animal. These were from weapons, energy weapons. Whoever had done this was not far away. The forest shifted again. A bird-like creature called from somewhere high above, and the wind rustled the leaves. But underneath those natural sounds, Jace thought he heard something else. A faint hum, mechanical, distant but moving closer. He looked at her again. She was in bad shape. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes closed again, her head leaning against the rock. If he left her, she might not survive the hour. But if he stayed, whoever had hurt her might find them both. Ranger gave a soft whine, looking at Jace as if waiting for him to decide. Jace hesitated, his mind racing. He was just a traveler, not a soldier, not a doctor. He didn't know her, didn't even know if helping her would cause trouble. But something inside him refused to walk away. He reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her skin felt warm, almost feverish, and under his touch he felt a faint, uneven heartbeat. She stirred slightly, her lips moving as if to say something, but the words faded into a sigh. Jace glanced into the shadows again, his instincts screaming that time was running out. Somewhere beyond the trees, the faint hum was growing louder. He didn't know what it was, but he was sure it was searching for her. "All right," he muttered to himself, "we're not leaving you here." With careful movements, he slid one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile. Ranger moved ahead, sniffing the air, leading the way back through the thick forest. The glowing plants brushed against Jace's arms as he carried her. Every step felt heavier, not from her weight, but from the danger pressing in on them. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew that whatever was behind them would not stop until it found her, and now it would find him too. Jace pushed through the thick forest, the alien girl in his arms, Ranger moving ahead like a silent shadow. Every step seemed to make the air heavier, as if the trees themselves were watching. The distant mechanical hum he had heard before was now fading slightly, but he knew it could return at any moment. The girl's head rested against his chest. Her breathing was slow but uneven, and every few seconds her body would twitch from pain. Jace could feel the heat radiating from her wounds. The strange burns on her arm still glowed faintly, and the cuts along her side were deep, leaving thin trails of dark purple blood. Ranger stopped suddenly and sniffed the air. Jace froze, lowering the girl slightly so he could listen. For a long moment, there was nothing but the wind moving the tall, glowing plants. Then somewhere behind them, he heard the faint crunch of footsteps. Not one set. Several. Whoever they were moving slowly, as if searching. He didn't wait to see who it was. He adjusted his grip on the girl and moved faster, his boots finding every bit of solid ground they could. Ranger kept looking back, low growls rumbling in his chest. They broke through a patch of tall ferns, and the girl stirred. Her eyes opened, half-lidded, silver and bright, even in the low light. She looked up at him, confused at first, then with a flicker of recognition, or maybe it was hope. Her lips moved, but the words were soft and strange, shaped in a language he couldn't understand. "I don't know what you're saying," Jace murmured, trying to keep his voice calm. "But you're safe. For now." Her gaze shifted to Ranger, who trotted alongside them. She reached out weakly, her fingers brushing the dog's fur. Ranger glanced at her, but didn't pull away. If anything, he slowed down to walk closer to her side. The girl's hand dropped again, too tired to keep it up. Her eyes closed. Jace kept moving, forcing himself not to think about how fragile she felt in his arms. Minutes later, he reached a small clearing. A fallen log lay across the middle, its surface covered in moss. Jace set her down gently against it and crouched to check her wounds again. Up close, he saw something strange. The burns on her arm weren't just injuries. They were almost patterned, as if the weapon that hit her had carved symbols into her skin. The deep cuts on her side were crusted with dried purple blood, but the edges looked unnaturally clean, as if made by a blade sharper than anything human. She let out a weak sound when he touched one of the wounds. Jace pulled his hand back quickly. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I'll try to help, but I'm no medic." He dug into his pack and pulled out a small first aid kit, basic human supplies. Nothing designed for alien biology. Still, it was better than nothing. He took out a disinfectant spray and hesitated. He didn't know if it would hurt her more. The girl opened her eyes again and seemed to understand what he was about to do. She gave a small nod, as if telling him to go ahead. "All right," he muttered. "Hold still." The moment the spray touched her wound, she winced sharply, her hand grabbing the edge of his sleeve. Ranger's ears twitched, but he stayed where he was. Jace worked quickly, cleaning the cuts and wrapping them with clean bandages from his kit. The burns he could only cover lightly, unsure how to treat them. When he finished, the girl leaned back against the log, breathing a little steadier. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in curiosity. She spoke again, this time slower, as if trying to find words he might understand. One of those words sounded almost like thank. Jace blinked. "You're welcome." He guessed our lips curved slightly, the smallest hint of a smile. Then her expression shifted to fear, and she pointed weakly past him into the trees. JSC turned. Through the shadows, faint red lights flickered, drones sweeping the forest. They moved in a slow search pattern, scanning the ground with thin beams. He swore under his breath, quickly lifting her again. "We're not staying here." Ranger barked once, sharp and warning, then dashed ahead to lead the way. Jace followed him, staying low as they moved deeper into the trees. The drones hummed closer, their red lights weaving through the foliage. For the next several minutes, it was a tense, silent escape. The girl's breathing was shallow, and Jace could feel her pulse beating weakly against his arm. The drones passed within 50 meters, but the thick leaves and the slope of the ground kept them hidden. Finally, they reached a narrow ravine with a trickle of water running through it. Jace slid down the slope, landing on damp stones. Ranger splashed through the shallow water ahead, checking for danger. Here, the hum of the drones was distant again. Jace crouched in the shadow of a large rock, catching his breath. The girl's eyes were closed, her face pale under its faint glow. He looked at her and muttered, "Whoever you are, someone really wants you dead." And for the first time, he wondered if saving her might pull him into something much bigger than he could handle. The ravine was damp and cold, the air heavy with the smell of moss and wet stone. Jace crouched against the rock wall, holding the alien girl close to keep her warm. Ranger stood at the narrow entrance, ears forward, watching the shadows. The sound of the drones had faded for now, but Jace knew they were still out there, sweeping the forest like wolves hunting a wounded deer. He didn't know how many there were or how far they would go to find her, but judging by her injuries, whoever had attacked her wasn't planning to leave survivors. The girl stirred in his arms, her head lifting slightly. Her eyes opened, dim silver light reflecting off the wet stones. She looked around, her gaze darting toward the ravine's opening as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Jace met her eyes. "You're safer now," he said quietly, even though he wasn't sure it was true. She tried to speak, her voice barely more than a whisper, the words soft and strange. Jace shook his head. "I can't understand you." She frowned, then tapped her chest. "Avalyn," she said slowly. "Avalyn," repeated. She nodded, then touched his arm, as if asking for his name. "Jace," he said. "And that's Ranger." Ranger gave a quiet woof, as if confirming the introduction. For a brief moment, the tension in Avalyn's face eased, but then she winced, clutching her side. Jace looked down at the bandages he had put on her earlier. Already, the purple stains were spreading through the fabric. The bleeding hadn't stopped completely. He needed to get her somewhere safer, somewhere he could treat her better. But that would mean moving again, and the drones were still hunting. He weighed his options. He could leave her here, hidden in the ravine, and hope the searchers passed by. That would keep him out of trouble. But if they found her, she wouldn't stand a chance. Or he could take her with him. Deeper into the forest, to an old shelter he knew about from his last trip here. It wasn't much a run-down supply hut near the river, but it would give them cover. Still, carrying her that far would be slow and dangerous. Ranger turned and looked at him, tail low, as if sensing the conflict in his mind. Avalyn touched his sleeve again, her eyes searching his face. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. The fear there was clear. Jace exhaled slowly. "All right," he muttered. "We're not leaving you behind." He shifted her weight in his arms and stood. She was light, too light for someone her size. He could feel the heat of her fever through her strange armor. Ranger trotted ahead, climbing the slope out of the ravine. The forest above was darker now. The last of the daylight was slipping away, and the glowing plants cast strange shadows across the ground. Every crack of a branch made Jace tense. He kept his eyes moving, scanning the tree line for movement. They moved in silence for several minutes, following a narrow trail that wound between massive roots and jagged rocks. Twice, Ranger stopped to sniff the air, and each time Jace froze, listening. Once he thought he heard the faint hum again, but it passed without coming closer. Evelyn's breathing grew more labored. She pressed a hand weakly against his chest, as if telling him to stop. Jace slowed, kneeling beside a thick tree trunk, to give her a rest. Up close, he could see more of the strange markings on her armor. They weren't decorative, they looked like symbols, burned into the surface, some of them faintly glowing. He didn't know if they were part of her culture or a sign of the people who had attacked her. She opened her eyes again and spoke a few halting words in her language. Then she pressed her fingers against her own wounds, and her gaze became pleading. "You want me to hurry?" Jace guessed. She nodded, though the effort seemed to cost her. Jace glanced at Ranger. "All right, boy. Fast, but quiet." They set off again, this time moving with more urgency. Jace's arms ached from carrying her, but he ignored it. He had carried heavier loads in his life, but none that felt as important as this as they neared the river. The air grew cooler, and the sound of rushing water reached them. The hut was close now, maybe 10 minutes away. But the forest here was more open, with fewer places to hide. If the drones appeared now, they would be exposed. Halfway to the riverbank, Ranger froze, muscles stiff. Jace stopped instantly, his eyes scanning the tree line. Then he saw it, a faint red light moving slowly between the trees. No more than 50 meters away. He crouched low, shifting Evelyn so she was shielded by his body. The light passed behind a cluster of thick vines, then vanished. Jace held his breath until Ranger's ears relaxed, when the danger seemed to pass. They moved again, slipping through the trees until the river came into view, dark, wide ribbon cutting through the forest. The hut stood on the far side, half hidden by overgrown brush. Jace's relief was short-lived. The sound of the drones was back, louder now, and it was coming from both sides. They were being boxed in. He broke into a run, splashing through the shallow water at the edge of the river, Evelyn clinging weakly to his chest. Ranger bounded ahead, barking once before disappearing into the brush near the hut. They reached the door just as the red lights of the drones began to glow between the trees. Jace kicked it open and stepped inside, shutting it quickly behind them. Inside, the air was stale and dusty, but it was shelter. He laid Evelyn on an old cot and checked her bandages again. She was pale, her breathing shallow, but her eyes stayed locked on him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jace said quietly, "You're safe. For now." But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The old supply hut smelled of dust and rusted metal. The single window was covered with a cracked panel, and the only light inside came from thin lines between the wooden planks. Outside, the forest was quiet again, but Jace knew it was the kind of quiet that came before something happened. Ranger paced near the door, ears twitching at every faint sound. His nails clicked softly against the wooden floor. Jace crouched beside Evelyn, who lay on the cot. Her breathing was uneven, and her eyes were half closed, but they kept darting toward the door, as if she could feel the danger waiting outside. Jace checked the bandages again. The purple stains had spread further, and the burns along her arm had stopped glowing. which might have been good or might have been a sign she was getting weaker. "You need a medic," Jace muttered. "And not the kind I can find out here." Aveline opened her eyes and studied him. She spoke in short, broken words, her accent heavy, her voice rough. "No medic." They frowned. "You mean, if I take you to a clinic, whoever's after you will find you?" She nodded slowly, her gaze serious. Then she glanced toward the window, her expression tightening. Ranger growled low in his throat. Jace moved to the door and pressed his ear against it. At first, he heard nothing. Then, faint and far off, came the hum again, the sound of drones. It was softer than before, but it was joined by something else. A mechanical clank, heavy and deliberate, like armored boots stepping on stone. He didn't like the sound of that. "Stay here," he told Aveline, though he knew she wasn't in any shape to go anywhere. He slipped outside, crouching low. The forest floor was damp under his boots, and the glow from the plants cast shifting shadows. He moved to the side of the hut and peered through the leaves. At first, all he saw was the dark. Then, between the trees, a shape moved tall, broad, and armored from head to toe. Its visor glowed faint red, scanning the ground. Another one followed, and another, each moving slowly, methodically. They weren't drones. They were soldiers. Jace's gut tightened. This wasn't a random search party. These were trackers. And from the way they moved, they knew exactly what they were doing. Ranger crept up beside him, silent now, his gaze fixed on the soldiers. Jace gave the dog a hand signal to stay low. He slipped back into the hut and closed the door without making a sound. Aveline's eyes were on him the moment he stepped inside. "Soldiers," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened. She said something in her language, the words sharp and quick. Then she switched to broken human speech. "They kill all." "See me?" Jace didn't ask why. The look in her eyes told him enough. This wasn't a hunt for justice. It was a cleanup. Whoever these soldiers worked for didn't want witnesses. The noise outside grew louder, the metallic steps crunching leaves, the hum of drones blending into the rhythm of their movement. Shadows passed by the cracks in the hut's wall, slow and deliberate. Ranger pressed his nose to the floorboards, sniffing. Then moved to stand between Aveline and the door. Jace's mind raced. The hut had one door and no other exit. They came in, it would be over fast. He looked around, searching for anything he could use. In the corner, an old storage crate sat half open, filled with rusted tools and bits of scrap metal. The footsteps stopped silence. Then, a sharp, metallic click echoed outside, followed by the faint whir of a scanning device. A red beam of light slid across the cracks in the wall, passing over Jace's hand. He pulled it back instantly. Aveline tensed, her eyes wide. She whispered something urgent, pointing to the floor. Jace looked and saw a small hatch half hidden. Under the cot was old and rusty, but big enough for a person to fit through. Without hesitation, he slid the cot aside, grabbed the metal ring, and pulled. The hatch creaked loudly, but the sound was swallowed by the hum outside. Beneath it was a narrow tunnel, dark and damp, leading away from the hut. Ranger sniffed it, then looked at Jace as if to say it was clear. Jace lifted Aveline gently and lowered her into the tunnel. She grimaced but didn't resist. Ranger slipped in next, his body moving easily through the space. Jace followed last, pulling the hatch shut above him. The tunnel was low, forcing him to crawl. The air smelled of wet soil and old wood, and the faint sound of running water echoed. Ahead, behind them, muffled through the earth, came the sound of the hut's door being forced open. Boots stomped across the floor. Metal clanged against wood. Voices spoke in a harsh, guttural language he didn't recognize. They didn't know about the tunnel dash yet. Jaco moved faster, the dirt cold under his palms. The tunnel sloped downward, curving until a faint blue light appeared ahead. Within minutes, they emerged at the edge of the riverbank, hidden under thick roots that hung over the water. Cool night air hit Jace's face. He took a deep breath, then looked at Aveline. Her eyes were open, watching him closely. For the first time, he thought he saw something in them besides fears, something like trust. Ranger shook the dirt from his fur and stood guard. "We keep moving," Jace said quietly. "They're not stopping." And from the way the shadows had moved in the forest, he knew this wasn't just about one wounded alien girl. Whatever Aveline was caught up in, it was bigger than either of them now. He was part of it too. The river's soft rush filled the air, a constant, steady sound that masked their movements. Moonlight cold and pale slipped through the canopy above, making the water glisten like liquid glass. Jace guided Aveline along the bank, supporting her with one arm while Ranger padded ahead, ears twitching. The cold air seemed to wake her slightly, but every step still looked painful. She leaned into him, her breaths slow and shallow. They moved under the shadow of thick trees until the old river shelter came into view. It was nothing more than a small, weather-beaten structure of metal and wood, half hidden by tangled vines. The roof sagged in the middle, and one wall was nearly gone, but it was better than being out in the open. Ranger reached it first, sniffing every corner before looking back to give a short, approving bark. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old earth. Broken crates lay in one corner, and the remains of a campfire were scattered in the middle of the floor. Jace guided Aveline to the driest patch and eased her down onto a blanket from his pack. "You're safe here," he said, softly, though he knew safety was only temporary. Aveline's eyes followed him as he moved. She seemed calmer now, but there was still tension in her face, like she was carrying something heavier than her wounds. Her gaze shifted to the river outside, lingering there for a moment before returning to him. Jace crouched beside her, checking the bandages again. The bleeding had slowed, but the burns on her arms still looked raw, and her skin felt hot to the touch. He knew infection was a real danger, though with alien physiology, he had no idea how quickly it could spread. From his pack, he pulled out a small container of clean water and a ration bar. Breaking it in half, he held it out to her. "Eat something, it'll help." She took it with both hands, studying it like it was something strange. She sniffed it, then took a small bite. Her expression didn't change, but she ate the rest slowly, as though forcing herself to. When she finished, she looked at him and said, in careful, broken human speech, "Thank you." Jace gave a small nod. "Don't mention it." Silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the river. Ranger settled near the door, eyes on the forest. The tension in the air had eased slightly, but Jace's instincts told him not to relax too much. After a moment, Aveline reached into a pouch on her damaged armor. Her hand trembled as she pulled something out, a small, metallic disc no bigger than a coin. It shimmered faintly in the dim light. She held it out to him. "For trust," she said. Jace hesitated before taking it. The metal was warm, almost alive under his fingers. Etched across its surface were symbols like the ones on her armor, glowing faintly with the same silver light as her eyes. "What is this?" he asked. Aveline's expression grew serious. "Key," she said simply. Then, after a pause, "Danger. Big." He studied the disc. Whatever it was, it wasn't something she wanted, falling into the wrong hands. Before he could ask more, Ranger's ears shot up. He growled low, staring toward the forest. Jace moved to the doorway, scanning the trees. The night was still, but somewhere out there, he caught the faint flash of red light between the trunks. "They're still looking," he muttered under his breath. He stepped back inside, closing the door halfway. "We might have a few hours before they find this place," he told her. maybe less. Evelyn didn't look surprised. She leaned back against the wall, her breathing slow. They never stop. Jace frowned. Who are they? Her gaze shifted to the river again. Hunters, she said, voice soft. From my world, I run from them. Long time. That explained the skill and patience of the soldiers he'd seen earlier. They weren't just soldiers, they were specialists. People whose job was to track and eliminate. And she was their target. Jace looked at the coin-shaped key in his hand again. If she was carrying something valuable enough for them to hunt her across worlds, then keeping her here was more dangerous than he'd imagined. But he wasn't about to throw her out. He crouched beside her again. Right. You rest. I'll keep watch. For a moment, she seemed like she wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded. Her eyes drifted shut, exhaustion finally pulling her under. Ranger settled at her side, curling up close enough that his fur brushed against her arm. Jace leaned against the doorway, scanning the forest. The moonlight outside made the river shine, but it also cast long shadows among the trees. And in those shadows, he thought he saw movement, something big, moving slowly, just beyond the edge of the light. Whatever was out there wasn't done with them. And Jace knew that once Evelyn woke, he would need answers because they were running out of time. The river shelter was silent except for the gentle rush of water outside. The moon had shifted higher in the sky, its pale glow slipping through the cracks in the walls. Jace sat at the doorway, his rifle resting across his knees. Eyes fixed on the dark tree line. Ranger slept lightly near Evelyn, his head resting on his paws, but his ears twitched at every faint sound. The alien girl had been asleep for hours, her breathing slow and steady now, though Jace could still see the tension in her face, even in rest. When she stirred at last, it was sudden, her eyes opening wide as if she had woken from a dream. She didn't want to remember. She sat up a little too quickly and winced, pressing a hand to her side. Easy, Jace said, turning toward her. You're still hurt. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, in slow, careful human words, she said. You save me twice. He shrugged. Couldn't just leave you out there? Her gaze softened, but only for a second. Then her eyes moved to the small metallic disc he had set beside him on the floor. Hey, you Keith. See? She asked. Jesse picked it up, holding it between two fingers. You called it a key. A key to what? Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but as if she was deciding how much to tell him. Not thing. Map. She tapped the side of her head. To place. Jace raised an eyebrow. A map to where? She hesitated, her gaze shifting to the open crack in the wall where moonlight spilled in. Her voice dropped low, almost to a whisper. To the Ark. The word meant nothing to Jace at first, but the weight in her tone made him sit forward. The Ark. She nodded. Ship old. Before my people's war holds power. Jace felt the pieces starting to fit together. And these hunters, they're after you because you have this map. Her eyes met his, silver light catching the moon's glow. Yes, if they take it, they win. My world, gone. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. So you're not just some traveler who got caught in the wrong place. No, she said quietly. Then, after a pause, I am. Daughter of council leader, they call me. Princess Jace blinked. That explained the soldiers. The hunters weren't just after a Keith, they were after someone with political weight. Someone whose capture could change the balance of power. You could have told me earlier, A said, though his voice lacked any real accusation. Her lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. Would you still help? Jace didn't answer right away. He thought about the moment he had first seen her, lying in the forest, bleeding out. He didn't know her name or her title then, but he had still picked her up. "Yeah," he said finally. "I would." Something shifted in her expression, then a flicker of trust. Faint, but real. Before either of them could speak again, Ranger gave a low, steady growl. Jace turned instantly, scanning the trees. The red lights were back, weaving slowly through the forest. The hunters were still on their trail. Avalyn's eyes hardened. They will come. Soon Jace glanced at her wounds. "You're in no shape to run far." "I can walk," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. He thought quickly. The hut wouldn't hold if they were surrounded. The only chance was to move before the hunters closed in completely. "There's a ridge about a mile upriver," he said. "Steep on one side, only one way up. We could make a stand there if we had to." She nodded once. "I follow you." Jace packed quickly, slipping the metallic disc into his inner jacket pocket. Ranger moved to the door. "Ready?" Avalyn rose unsteadily, leaning on the wall for support. Her determination was clear. But Jace stayed close in case she stumbled. They stepped out into the cool night air, the river's mist curling around them. The red lights in the distance seemed closer now, moving in a slow arc to cut them off. "Stay close," Jace said, his voice low. They moved along the riverbank, Ranger leading the way. The sound of the water covered their footsteps. But every so often, Jace thought he heard something heavier metal on stone keeping pace with them in the dark. Halfway to the ridge, Avalyn spoke softly, almost to herself. "If I give you gift, bigger than key." Jace glanced at her. "What kind of gift?" Her silver eyes met his, unblinking. "Call, and I come. Anywhere, any world." He didn't reply, but the words stayed in his mind. By the time they reached the base of the ridge, the red lights had vanished into the trees behind them. For now, they had space. But Jace knew it wouldn't last. They climbed carefully, the slope steep but manageable. At the top, the ground leveled out into a flat, open space bordered by a wall of rock. It was defensibly exactly what he had hoped. As they settled in, Jace kept one hand on his rifle and the other in his pocket, feeling the warm metallic disc. He didn't know where this arc was or what it held. But he knew one thing. Whatever was inside, it was worth killing for. And now, he was part of the fight to keep it out of the wrong hands. The ridge was silent except for the faint hiss of wind moving over the rocks. From here, Jace could see the river winding like a silver ribbon under the moonlight. It looked peaceful, but he knew it wouldn't be for long. Ranger paced the edge of the ridge, nose to the ground, tail stiff. Avalyn sat against the rock wall, her face pale, but her eyes sharp. She clutched the side of her armor where the wounds lay beneath, but she didn't complain. "They come," she said quietly. Jace nodded. He had heard it too, the faint hum of drones, the distant clank of armored boots. The sound was growing louder, moving steadily toward them. He checked his rifle, sliding a fresh power cell into place. "When I say move, you head for the far side of the ridge and follow the path down. Stay low." Her gaze didn't waver. "And you?" "I'll keep them busy." She stared at him for a moment, then shook her head. "No, you saved me. I stay." Jace almost argued, but the resolve in her voice made him stop. He understood she had been running long enough. The first red lights appeared between the trees below, sweeping over the ground like searching eyes. The drones came first, gliding silently. Then the soldiers emerged, moving in formation, their armor dark and heavy, visors glowing faintly. Jace crouched low, aiming down the ridge. He waited until the first soldier was in range, then fired. The shot hit clean, sending the figure crashing to the ground. The others reacted instantly, scattering for cover and returning fire. Blue-white beams cut through the darkness, striking the rock face and sending shards flying. Ranger barked sharply and darted behind a boulder. Evelyn stayed low, watching the fight with narrowed eyes. Jace kept moving between cover, firing quick bursts, forcing the hunters to stay pinned. But there were more of them than he'd hoped, at least a dozen. The drones were circling overhead now, their scanners sweeping dangerously close. One beam grazed his shoulder, the heat searing through his jacket. He gritted his teeth and kept firing. Then he heard Evelyn's voice, sharp and commanding. "Jace, give me key." He turned, startled. She was already pulling herself to her feet, bracing against the rock wall. "It's too dangerous," he began. "Trust me," she snapped. Without thinking, he pulled the metallic disc from his pocket and tossed it to her. She caught it in one hand and pressed it to the glowing patterns on her armor. The disc fused instantly, light racing across the strange symbols until her whole chest plate pulsed with silver fire. "What are you doing?" Jace called over the roar of gunfire. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "Calling my ship." A deep hum began to rise, not from the forest, but from above. The sound grew, filling the air until a shadow passed over the moon. The hunters hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly as they glanced upward. Out of the clouds came a ship unlike anything Jace had ever seen. Sleek and silver, its surface shimmered as if made from liquid metal. It hovered silently over the ridge, a soft light spilling down from its underside. Evelyn stepped forward, raising one hand toward it. The light from the ship expanded, washing over the ridge in a warm glow. The drones sparked and fell from the air, their systems fried in an instant. The hunters staggered, their armor seizing up before they collapsed to the ground. Weapons clattering USLSLY. In seconds, the fight was over. Jace lowered his rifle, breathing hard. "That's one way to end a fight." Evelyn turned to him, a faint smile on her lips despite her exhaustion. "I told you, never stop." The ship descended until it hovered just above the ridge. A platform extended, lowering to the ground. Two tall figures in shining armor stepped out, clearly her people, but dressed in ceremonial gear rather than the hunters' dark armor. They approached quickly, speaking to Evelyn in their language. She answered briefly, then gestured toward JACE. One of the armored figures stepped forward and bowed slightly. "You have done more than save her life," he said in careful human speech. "You have saved our future." Jace didn't know what to say. Just seemed like the right thing to do. Evelyn stepped closer, her silver eyes locking on his. "Jace," she said softly, "I owe you my life. My people owe you peace, and you will never be alone." She reached into a compartment on her armor and pulled out a small, glowing crystal. She pressed it into his palm. "Call, and I will come any place, any time, even across stars." He closed his fingers around it. "I'll hold you to that." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the sound of the river and the hum of the ship surrounding them. Then she turned and stepped onto the platform with her guards. Ranger whined softly as the ship began to rise. Jace reached down to scratch his head. "Don't worry, boy. Something tells me this isn't the last we'll see of her." The ship climbed higher, its silver hull catching the moonlight, then vanished into the clouds. JC stood there on the ridge, the crystal warm in his hand, knowing that somewhere out there, an alien princess owed him more than gratitude. She owed him her loyalty. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would remember that one human and his dog had changed the course of history.